365 Sports. This is the second time we've had Kenneth Davis on the show. And the first time was so magical, I can't imagine what's going to happen here the next time. We have real chemistry as a segment. I just feel it. I feel this is something great starting. And Kenneth is with Big Ten Country. Also, I'm looking forward to hearing your podcast on the Bears this week after week one. I bet big in fantasy football this year on DJ Moore. Like I'm in 3 leagues. I've got him in 2 and almost got him in the 3rd. I got sniped, but I mean, I think he's about to feast this year. Am I wrong?
That's a sound decision. No. The thing is this, and we've been kind of talking about it, is the Hard Knocks bump. And you know how people get crazy. Like, you don't know the production that Keenan Allen is going to have. You don't know Rome. So if you're picking a Bears wide receiver, easily you go DJ. Yes, I'm with you. He's going to be, I mean, even last year, look at his production, and the quarterback situation wasn't settled last season. So,
yeah, there we go.
DJ is a sound. I would say any Bears offensive player that you have to draft within the first few rounds, DJ Moore is definitely that player. There really isn't any other player that I would draft in the first several rounds of any fantasy draft.
Also got Caleb Williams with my very last pick. And I couldn't believe it. I got Jaden Daniels, but it auto-selected. Yeah.
Because I was preparing dinner and I was running upstairs because I was trying to let her take a load off. She had a long day. And it auto-selected Jaden, but I wasn't upset because I kind of want that upside guy anyway, like you had with Caleb. So I was like, cool. You know what? Like, if everything works out and he plays as well as he did last year at LSU, I got a guy that I can stash and I can use. So I like how you're going. So you see now the vibes are vibing here.
It's right there. Listen, yeah. I mean, we've been apart for too long, clearly. All right, let's talk Big Ten this week. I want to start with Oregon because they were the only team that got a real kind of scare last week. Not USC notwithstanding, they were playing LSU. That was a great win for them, but I don't know if that was a scare. They knew that was going to be a game. Oregon, though, had a scare. They played sloppy penalty-wise. They didn't capitalize on opportunities when they had them. And Idaho was ready to ball. I mean, they were ready to do this. Now, obviously, they got out with their lives, but do you see this as indicative of what this team is, or is this they're just not motivated for Idaho like they would be for somebody else?
I would hate to say that they're not motivated, but it was shocking to say the least. And also just the need for the attempts passing wise from Dylan Gabriel stood out. You know, it's like, what's going on with the running game? Like the thing, a large thing the under center that we talked about with these Pac-12 schools entering into the Big Ten has been the trenches. And when just that game alone, and it's early because I've really been big on Oregon entering the Big Ten and being a team that can give Ohio State being the only team perhaps this season within the Big Ten that can give Ohio State a run for his money with the amount of weapons that Ryan Day has at Ohio State, and also, of course, bringing in Chip Kelly. But I was shocked. But I got enough faith in Dan Lanning in Oregon that this was kind of just one of those situations where they were down, like you were saying, that perhaps they were looking ahead instead of focusing on the team at hand. But there were definitely some questions as far as how they're going to be able to function in conference play within the Big Ten when things really get going here.
They have Boise State this week, who has one of my favorite players. He's actually been on our show a bunch of times because he's from Texas, Ashton Jeanty, who is like, he is as electric as any player in the country. Like, he is fantastic. And back at Boise State, he scored 6 touchdowns last week. Don't think he's going to score 6 again. And he might have to beat Oregon. But I don't think that they would ever, given the history between these two schools, be able to take Boise State lightly at all. So I expect a different Oregon this week, but they're going to be in for a fight for sure.
0-3 versus Boise State. So as you pointed out, you shouldn't be able to take. I think anybody now. It could be a situation where we live with recency bias, but I feel like if anybody has been watching college football for like the last 15 or 20 years, you kind of know not to take Boise State lightly. I'm with you. I think that they should be able to come out and really play Boise State well. And I'm looking forward to this game to kind of set the mark and kind of put away the questions that I just mentioned a second ago, where we can see the total offense with Oregon functioning properly, but also you can see some of those studs on defense get after the ball, particularly to stop this running game, because you regardless, you know Boise State's about to run the ball down your throat.
Yeah, absolutely. The biggest game of the week is Texas and Michigan. Texas is so loaded offensively, and they're a little less loaded defensively than they were a year ago, but it's not like they've gone from, the purple people eaters to, USC a year ago. They're still very good on that side of the ball. Michigan will be very good on defense all year. There's no doubt about that. But even if they slow Texas down, how much would they have to slow them down to keep in this game? Because Texas is going to score 40 points a bunch of times this year. If they keep them to 28, can they score 29 points?
I don't think so right now.
Yeah.
I don't see Davis Warren being able necessarily to pull it off, and we still don't know kind of how they're going to use Alex Orji. Now, we've of course seen the discussion about how Alabama implemented Jalen Miro against Texas. Steve Sarkisian has mentioned that, but I haven't seen it offensively. And I'll say this though, Paul, and you can help me with this. Being that you look at Texas and you also look at Michigan, knowing they were going to have the first really game of the season versus each other between two blue bloods, basically, right? Mm-hmm. How much of the offense were they not necessarily showing last week? It's kind of a question for me. I know Quinn Ewers had a decent game, even though he didn't do well as far as passing 20 yards or so. But still, that's kind of the question. The Michigan's defense is still stout, which gets to your point. Like, Michigan's defense may be able to slow Texas down and keep them within the 20s. But Michigan's offense, you didn't even see them implement the offense that you expected from this necessarily to take place. And there's just a lot of questions when I'm looking at Michigan's offense, to say the least.
Yeah. For Texas, obviously they didn't put out the full load of hay last week, when they were there. But Quinn Ewers will get in a rhythm. They have that. The big question is, look, they're down to their third and fourth running backs, who are both very, very talented and good. It's just not what they wanted, or second and third running backs. They're not what they necessarily wanted going into the year. So if those guys get contained, then that's going to be difficult for the Longhorns. But again, what are we talking about contained here? If this is in the 20s, right, then, the defense will probably be able to do its job, but can it be reciprocated? That I don't know. And they might have to rely on some defensive touchdowns or a block punt or something to shift the momentum in this game, because if you want that offense to score 3 or 4 touchdowns, I don't see it against this defense.
I love everything you're saying. And on top of that, you look at the fact that you didn't get the game from Donovan Edwards that you thought you were going to get. Mm-hmm. Again, perhaps they're kind of holding him out. You got Cortland Loveland, and the stud he is. But like, when you even think about that, you have one offensive pass catcher that Texas is really fearful for. It's not like last year's team where you had several. So for me, I'm Big Ten City here, but yeah, I'm definitely leaning towards Texas in this game. We had Alex Hull join us from the Michigan side this week, and he pointed out that he has Texas winning also. But with Michigan, you kind of never know. And if the offense picks up quicker than what we expect, perhaps it may not necessarily be a victory. And I hate to use a moral victory with the national champion, but it also could just be one of those things where the game's a lot closer than I feel like. And I don't know how you feel about the game, so let me say me. I think if the game's a lot closer than it's expected, that may be something for Michigan to know, what, we're not as far as from last year and from the roster and the coaching that we had last year, and we can get this back on pace. I know a lot of Michigan fans are kind of like, well, everything's a wash this year because we won a national championship. But in your heart of hearts, they don't want to be out of the playoffs if they don't have to be out of the playoffs. And it can vary from them being a single-digit 7-win team to perhaps a team that can get 10 victories. Right now, though, with Michigan's offense, I can't – even put it like this, and I'll end it right here. When you look at how bad they were on third downs, they were 0-6 on third downs that were 7 and longer. You think about, and we could talk about the fact that J.J. McCarthy, a lot of last year in those big games, they went away from him, but you always got to give him props for how vastly efficient he was on third and long. That was basically, in passing, his best attribute. So that's where I'm really fearful of Michigan offensively being able to contend. Even if Texas defense wasn't last year's defense, I'm hesitant to believe that they'll be able to take on Texas. And to your point, to end this, to keep up the score, because that's the thing. Sometimes your defense doesn't have to be great, but can you run with me if we're talking on the offensive side? And I don't think Michigan can keep up with the dogs that Texas has on the field offensively.
Yeah, I agree. I think Texas wins by 2 scores. I don't know, like, you know, I think it might be 2 scores. I don't see it being 3 or 4 scores, but you know, like if Michigan can muddy it up a little bit, they'll slow them down. But I think ultimately it just gets down to, you know, skill versus skill, and Texas has the advantage there. The Cyhawk game, Kenneth, I am optimistic. This game is usually hard for me to watch because it's sloppy, and I admire good defense, but like there comes a point where, like, you know, 10 to 7 most of the game gets kind of dull, you know, when you're just kind of between the 30s. Like that's where the game lives. It's like, well, I mean, can somebody get close? Like, you know, I'm fine with that, but this sometimes is offensive malpractice, and it seems to affect the entire state of Iowa. But I'm kind of optimistic that we might actually see some points scored in this game this year, because both teams appear to be better, especially Iowa State, better on offense than they were a year ago.
But even to the defensive point, you talk about SP plus and top 25 on defense, and Iowa State is one of the first teams out of the 8 that Iowa has to take on this year. And Iowa, of course, being one of the top teams that lasted a 3 of 5 years at SP plus when we're talking about D. So I'm with you, and it's funny when you say that, because I hear people arguing about taking unders and how people are like, man, you're not wishing for scoring. Yeah, I'm fine with a close game that's not a high potency game if it's probably on a professional level. I think when we're talking college, and as you mentioned, it gets kind of sloppy and it's not proficient offense, it's kind of like I'm spending a lot of my day watching people kind of learning on the job rather than getting what I can necessarily get. It's the truth. It's the truth. But you look at what we think Tim Lester and Cade McNamara are going to be able to do with this offense. You look at the fact that you had 3 different tight ends catch passes. You had 2 receivers score touchdowns. I'm hopeful with Iowa, because if Iowa can average around, I'll go high 25 points. If they can get around 25 points, there's going to be a lot of teams that has issues beating Iowa this year. It's going to take really the top teams, like perhaps, even though it's not like they don't know them, but an Ohio State, you know, like teams in that type of vein, to be able to be like, you can't keep up with the amount of scoring I can put on you. Even if you can stifle me, you can't smother me, and you can't get here to where necessarily if I can get this to 27 or 30. But I hope, but I have to see it to be, because I mean, if you're being honest with Iowa, I would be coming on here, Paul, lying in your face if I'm like, all the offensive worries for both teams, but particularly the Big Ten school, Iowa, they're gone. We don't have to worry about it. You know, it was all Brian Ferentz' fault. No, it wasn't. This is an Iowa issue when you're talking about the fact that how bad they've been in total scoring, in total yards on the offensive side. It's been remedial, basically. But you look at last week, having 400, I think 475, something in the 400s as far as yards of offense. Hopefully, you know, they can keep matriculating in that fashion.
Yeah, I hope so. Absolutely. I'm wondering, like, what the long-term future for them is. You know, like, what do they do if they don't have that? You know.
Wait. You mean if so? Let me just get the question right before I get myself in any type of trouble. If Iowa's offense continues to struggle this season and moving forward, is that the question that you're proposing?
Yeah. Like, what do they do? Like,
I don't know if I don't know. I'll be lying into your face if I say that they will get rid of Kirk Ferentz. I think I think Iowa's, I'll say this. I think Iowa fans, like the alums that I know, you know, maybe a decade ago, they were frustrated, but they still knew that just defensively and special team wise, they could beat their chest and take out some of the better teams within the Big Ten, even though that was kind of a different Big Ten before, let's just say, Urban Meyer got here at the beginning of Urban Meyer's run. When you're talking about the amount of talent that Urban Meyer infused in Ohio State, I'll get back to Iowa, I always make it a difference that Jim Trushel's Ohio State was different from Urban Meyer's Ohio State. The speed, everything that you saw in that fashion. So you would still have Iowa be able to take on teams like really Ohio State, because Michigan wasn't really Michigan the way Michigan thought they should be until like the last 3 seasons of Jim Harbaugh's tenure at Michigan. I would think it'd have to be enough bluster to where he would have to say, I'm ready to step down. It still could be a force. It could be a force out, but I think they would never make it as messy because just how that state perhaps feels about him, even if they're tired of getting the same results, if that answers your question.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's move on to what I think is the most interesting game that's not being talked about in Kansas and Illinois, because Kansas is pretty good. If they've got all their starters, they're pretty good. We don't know a lot about Illinois, but their fans are clearly fired up for this game because they sold it out. So in Champaign, they feel good about the team they have, and even with a fully healthy, really good Kansas team coming in, clearly they're fired up about it. Is this an Illinois team that can beat Kansas?
They could. I'll say they can beat Kansas. But the thing, if you like, and a lot of people didn't watch Illinois last year, and I understand it's my state school, the Northwestern, as far as the Big Ten, Northwestern Illinois, we talk a lot about, and people get mad at us. I've reading the comments. I apologize. We will get to Maryland for everybody watching the show, Big Ten country. But the thing is, last year when it came to Illinois, they were one of those teams where they totally looked out of it. And like me and James, my co-host on Big Ten Country, he drives the show, we'd be texting each other on the text thread and be like, man, they're down by 17 or whatever. And there was so many games where they had dramatic comebacks, or they came back and they missed it by a hair. The problem, though, was there was a quarterback that their starter, Luke Altmaier, got injured last year. Luke Altmaier has wheels and a good arm on him. All right. So he's a talented player. But Paddock came in, and this kid, he could light it up. Like him and Isaiah Williams had a connection, and they were able to turn defenses over on a dime last year. When you're talking about Kansas and Jaden Daniels, I don't know if Illinois can, keep up with their scoring wise, because however you feel about Kansas, you know they can put points on the board. But also you look at the fact that now Illinois' key, they don't have the law firm, with Newton and Randolph at tackle it, but now they're saying that their linebacking core is the new law firm. We've known that they've had players make it to the pros and leave in their defensive backfield. But one thing about Illinois, Brett Bielema has kind of improved on what Lovey was doing there. Like the defense, it's becoming much more. Illinois throughout the years has had good defenses. You go back to Simeon Rice and Hardy, like they have though, but it's been consistency with Illinois that's been a problem. So I think Illinois definitely, I wouldn't be surprised to answer your question. Can Illinois beat Kansas? Yes, particularly in Champaign-Urbana. It wouldn't surprise me. But right now, I have to see Luke Altmaier take another step before I would go and say, you know what, this is going to be an upset. This will be an upset victory. It's going to take me about 2 more, this game and another game, to see if Luke Altmaier has grown to the point where he can be that factor that they can stay in these games against teams that can put up a lot of points or a decent amount of points like Kansas.
All right, we're going to wrap it up with the contrasting styles game this week, which is finesse in Colorado, and Matt Rule get down nitty gritty. Whose style wins this week?
I'm taking the home cooking. First of all, let me say this. I grew up loving me some Deion Sanders. So I'm never going to loving Deion Sanders. Deion Sanders was just that iconic class player. I still believe if I was putting an all defensive team together from the NFL, he would still be one of my starting cornerbacks. But in saying that, there's been issues when I'm big. I know. Listen, when you and I aren't small men, all right. So there's always going to be like big on the trenches. And I know Shadur Sanders, was only sacked once, but it's also, and we know this, it's not all about sacks. It's really about pressures. That's the thing with football in general. It's amount of pressure, because a lot of times now it's a lot harder to get to the quarterback, and some of the rules make it less advantageous necessarily depending on how you're going to hit the quarterback, but it's the amount of pressures that you can get. And I don't know, and it's funny when you say contrasting styles, I don't know if the Colorado's Buffs are going to be able to withstand what that defensive front that Nebraska and Matt Rule is going to break to keep that quarterback going. But also, this is the key too. Colorado hasn't been able to prove that they have a running game. And you look, Shedeur Sanders is a gifted passer to say the least. But we all know you're going to need the running game if you're really going to pull it off. You look at the fact that you got several of the best players in college football on Colorado's side with, Shedeur, with Jimmy Horns Jr. and I don't even know how I'm blanking out on the defensive back wide receiver kid that's
Travis Hunter.
Travis Hunter, the best player in college football, basically.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like that, look, you can win any battle going into it with them. But for me, where there's questions about your defense, The only thing good about you at Colorado is your passing game. On the flip side, we've seen that with Matt Rule wants to build it through the program, through, regionally. We know what we saw with Dylan Raiola has shown us what he could possibly be. It's a small sample size, but that changes the game. I'll say this: if they didn't have Dylan Raiola, I'd probably be leading towards Colorado. These are two sleeping giants, to say the least. Neither one of these teams have been what we've expected them to be really for maybe the last 20 years. But I got definitely Nebraska. Also, just being in Lincoln, I got Nebraska pulling this one out. I think, and also it's the second year bump by Matt Rule. Like Matt Rule is at Temple and at Baylor has showed, like I can do this. And that to me that means something when you had that there's proof in the sauce of the type of program creator that you are. So for me, I'm gonna go with. I'm sorry about to say color. I'm going to go with Nebraska because I think they're going to get more pressure on Shedeur Sanders. And I think the running game is going to be a problem. And I also don't know if Colorado's defense is going to be stout enough to stop Dylan Raiola and that offense from scoring enough points to keep up with whatever Shedeur and Travis Hunter do on the offensive side.
Kenneth Davis, Big Ten Country with us here on 365 Sports. Kenneth, love it. Can't wait to talk to you next week. Again, go check him out in the podcast. And I cannot wait for the Monday and listen to the Bears and how they did, because this is going to be a fun year for the Bears too. So listen to all Kenneth's podcasts, watch him, however you get him. He's great. Kenneth, thank you so much. I'll talk to you next week.
Appreciate you, Paul. Appreciate everybody in the background, and you all have a great weekend.
Kenneth Davis, Big Ten Country. We're back right after this.